In this entry, I would like to look at Come Out of the Wilderness in more detail, as I feel it's interesting as the only female narrated story in the collection going to meet the man. But also, the interracial relationship is one that we have only explored once previously over the module text in Passing by Langston Hughes. I actually believe the term passing is somewhat equally relevant to Come Out of the Wilderness, in fact. I think one of the phrases in the text which resonated with me and stuck in my head was when Ruth's father calls her black and dirty, and how this is brought up in her thoughts and indirect speech throughout the text. I think ultimately Ruth is attempting to rid herself of this label as black and dirty, which has haunted her through her relationships with white men. This is personally, I feel, much like the character in Passing, who is attempting to rid himself of the label of blackness in order to have social
How
freedom.
did you feel when you come out? Come out the wilderness. When you come out. Come out the wilderness. When you come out. Come out the wilderness. Tell me how did you feel when you come out? Come out the wilderness. Leaning. Oh, we're leaning on the Lord.
The song that is alluded to is a hymn about saviour and redemption, about emerging from sin into goodness, being lost and becoming found. It reminds me of the idiom making out of the woods alive, but also in a literal sense is about transitioning from rural into the urban, a journey which Ruth does herself from south to north in an attempt to achieve the metaphorical meaning of saviour from sin. As Mr. Davis notes, she is not simply a country girl, but a country girl who came to the city, and that's the dangerous kind. I think that Baldwin illuminates the difficulty of coming out of the wilderness. The comparisons between mentality and literal movement is epitomised on the pages 205 and 6. We are told, soon her mind, like life on the island, seemed to be incapable of flexibility of moving outward, could only shriek upward into meaningless abstractions or drop downward into cruelty and confusion. I feel like only being able to go up or down could be about existing only in the north or south, or only being good or bad, being in heaven or hell. I think the most prominent thing is that these restrictions essentially don't allow for growth and progression. I think her attempts to come out of the wilderness are mostly unsuccessful, and in the last line she walks through the crowd and realizes she did not know where she was going. In my last entry, I looked at the relationships between the males and the father-son relationship, but now I want to consider the relationship between black and white. Much like in the final story, Going to Meet the Man, there is this essence of guilt and insecurity, which I think is reflective of a larger national psyche. Despite being in an intimate relationship, there's still this notion of master and slave, how Paul puts a price of $1,000 on Ruth, and how she says that she was trapped. Paul was a trap. There is this vocabulary of servitude still. There is this similarity between the notions of white and black, however. Ruth associates both with guilt. She explains Paul's touch, which should have raised her, lifted her roughly, only to be thrown down hard. Whenever he touched her, she became blacker and dirtier. Again, there is this idea of up and down, being raised and dropped. Her conflict is that neither the black man, such as her father, brother, or previous black partners, could raise her, yet neither could the white males. I personally feel like Paul had just become this metaphor for Ruth, the way in which she deals with an underlying anger, perhaps. In the office, she notices how the white women fantasize over the black Mr. Davis, and she thinks of Paul and how the white women can't lay a finger on Mr. Davis, but look what she took from them, from you. She also thinks of Paul dying and how his death would be an inadequate revenge for the colour of his skin. I feel like she's in this perpetual limbo. She feels like her blackness is associated with being dirty and perhaps sexually promiscuous, yet she also feels like she cannot forgive the history of the white successors of slave owners. I think one thing which I found notable when reading the story a second time was just the sheer repetition of the words lone and lonely and alone. How her brother ends up alone as a drunk, and how the white male in the bar at the end is alone. But I think ultimately her own loneliness throughout. I know that Baldwin spoke highly of love, and I think this story just emphasises that life without love is incredibly isolating.